The porch light flickered above me as I read the forged signature on the guardianship papers. Still, that same cold glow steadied my hands when I folded the document instead of tearing it. As the bulb hummed, its low tremor matched the truth settling in my chest. While its pale halo swayed, I understood my children hadn't come to save me, they'd come to claim me. The same trembling light showed me exactly who they'd become. That's when I decided, justice doesn't need rage, only clarity. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. The morning air over Charlotte carried that brittle, late-fall chill, the kind that slips under a man's collar and reminds him he isn't as young as he used to be. Walt Grayson stepped onto his front porch with a steaming mug of black coffee, expecting the usual. The creak of old boards, the hum of distant traffic, maybe a squirrel tearing apart one of his wife's long-forgotten planters. Instead, something sharp and out of place caught his eye. A thick, certified envelope sat neatly against the welcome mat, pinned by a discarded rubber band. The green notification tag was unmistakable: Office of the District Attorney, Mecklenburg County. Walt's breath pulled short. Certified letters from the DA didn't arrive with good news. He picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of it in his hand, the way an officer senses danger before seeing the weapon. His name, Walterlgrayson, was typed in clean, emotionless font. For a moment he wondered if it was some bureaucratic mistake, maybe a witness summons from years ago that had resurfaced. But then he saw the red stamp on the corner, urgent legal notice. His stomach tightened. He eased himself onto the porch chair, every creak of his joints echoing the unease building in his chest. He slid a finger under the seal and opened it. Papers rustled, a harsh, official sound that cut through the quiet morning. He unfolded the first page. His world shifted. You are being charged with felony elder neglect. The words seemed to thicken the air around him. He blinked once, twice, as if the text would rearrange itself into something logical, something survivable. But it didn't. His pulse drummed in his ears while he scanned the rest, his mind trying to anchor itself to reason. Then he froze on the next line. Complaint filed by Aaron Grayson, Michael. His children. For a long, raw moment, Walt couldn't breathe. His vision blurred at the edges, and he had to set the paper down because his hands had begun to tremble, something they hadn't done even in the worst nights on the force. He rubbed his forehead, trying to steady himself. He'd raised those kids alone. He'd packed their lunches, stayed up with them through fevers, worked extra shifts so Michelle could join dance classes and Aaron could play baseball with a proper glove. And now their names sat on an accusation that could destroy what was left of his life. He lifted the paper again, rereading the line as if it might suddenly make sense, but every pass only deepened the disbelief. Elder neglect. Him. Walt had lived alone for years on his own terms, healthy, independent, disciplined. There wasn't a single person he was responsible for neglecting. Unless... A thought flickered, a dark one, a deliberate one. He fumbled for his phone and dialed Aaron. The ringtone buzzed coldly against his ear. Once, twice, 5 times, then voicemail. No callback. He tried again, straight to voicemail. Each unanswered ring tightened the coil in his chest until it sat like metal. He switched to Michelle. She didn't pick up either. Instead, a text popped up. Dad, this is for your own good. Walt stared at those 8 words. They were so hollow, so calculated, they barely felt like they came from the daughter who used to run into his arms after school. No explanation, no concern, no softness, just a message that read like something coached, something rehearsed. His grip on the phone loosened and he lowered it to his lap. Around him, the quiet suburban street carried on, neighbors pulling out of driveways, a dog barking in the distance, leaves scraping along concrete. The world moved as though nothing had shifted. But everything inside him had. He picked up the letter again, studying it with the eyes of a man who spent decades reading criminal reports. The phrasing was too clean, too broad. Not a single detail describing an incident, a complaint of behavior, a witness statement. It was a skeleton accusation, one built to start a legal avalanche without needing to stand on its own legs. That wasn't an accident. Walt leaned back in his chair, his mind clearing into a cold, familiar stillness he hadn't felt since his policing days. The gut-feeling officers rely on, the whisper beneath the noise, the instinct that saved his life more than once stirred at the base of his spine. This wasn't concern. This was intervention. This was a setup. Slow, deliberate, and aimed precisely at the one place he was most vulnerable: his reputation, his independence, his life's work. He folded the letter carefully, almost ceremonially, and placed it on the small porch table beside him. The sunlight shifted across it, illuminating the bold black print of the DA's seal. Whatever this was, it wasn't random, and it wasn't going away. Walt exhaled, a long, heavy breath that carried 30 years of discipline behind it. A storm was coming, one he never imagined would come from inside his own home. He stared at the door, half tempted to retreat inside, but stayed frozen in his chair instead, the question gnawing at him. Why would his own children want him gone? And beneath that, a deeper, sharper question whispered. What were they planning next? Walt spent most of the afternoon pacing his living room, the letter from the DA folded neatly on the coffee table like a live explosive. He decalled both of his children early that morning, asking them to come by. No accusations, no anger, just a simple request. We need to talk, face to face. He hoped the sound of his voice would shake something loose, maybe remind them of the man who raised them, not the caricature they handed to the prosecutor. By 5 o'clock, only one car pulled into the driveway. Aaron stepped out, wearing a pressed button-down and that faint cologne he used whenever he wanted to project success. He walked in without knocking, as if the house already belonged to him. Traffic was a mess, he said, though his tone was annoyingly smooth, almost rehearsed. He didn't ask how Walt was doing, didn't ask about the letter. He just chose a seat like someone taking control of a meeting he'd organized. Walt studied him carefully. The smugness wasn't subtle. Aaron sat back, legs crossed, fingers laced over his knee like he was about to deliver corporate bad news. "Dad," he began, drawing out the word, "we need to talk realistically about your situation. You can't live alone anymore." The sentence landed with a dull thud in the center of the room. Walt felt his jaw tighten. "Says who?" he asked quietly. Aaron shrugged, pretending neutrality. "Everyone sees it. You forget things, you isolate. The house isn't as clean as it used to be. We're worried." Worried? Of all the words Aaron could have chosen, that one stung the most because it was so blatantly dishonest. Walt leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice steady. "Is this you talking?" he asked. "Or is this Daniel whispering in your ear?" For the first time since walking in, Aaron's confidence cracked. His eyes darted away toward the bookshelf, the window, anywhere but his father. He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. "Why would Daniel care?" he muttered. But Walt had seen that tell thousands of times, on suspects, informants, even nervous rookies. Deflection was an answer of its own. Before he could press further, Aaron's phone buzzed. He swiped it open and sighed theatrically. "Michelle can't make it. She wants to join by video." He didn't wait for Walt's approval before tapping the screen. Michelle appeared, framed by the soft yellow light of her kitchen. Her shoulders were rigid, her expression distant. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly, and though the words were gentle, her eyes weren't. Walt swallowed the urge to ask her why she hadn't come in person. Instead, he nodded. "I need to hear from you directly, both of you. What is this? Why file charges against your own father?" Michelle inhaled sharply as if bracing herself. "Dad, it's not charges, it's intervention. You're not the same anymore. You forget appointments, you don't answer calls, you isolate yourself. We talked to a professional." "What professional?" Walt cut in. "Name them." She hesitated, eyes shifting. Aaron jumped in before she could answer. "Dad, this isn't about one thing. It's a pattern of decline, and guardianship will protect you." The word guardianship felt like a knife, a legal cage, control handed over. Walt steadied his breathing, letting silence stretch until both of them shifted uncomfortably. "This is about the cabin," he finally said. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight. "And the pension, you want access." Aaron scoffed, but too quickly, too defensively. "Dad, come on. That place is falling apart. You can't manage a property that far out anymore." Michelle's voice trembled through the phone. "We're trying to help." "No," Walt replied, softer than he expected. "You're trying to take." He watched Aaron's jaw clench, the mask dropping just slightly. He saw the calculation in his eyes, the entitlement. That was the moment the truth clicked into place, not just suspicion, but certainty. Michelle spoke again, but her voice had lost cohesion, strained and fragile. "We're doing what's best. You'll understand one day." Walt felt something deep inside him crumble, not in collapse but in realization. A kind of mourning. The children he'd raised with Bet. MS stories and scraped-knee bandages were gone, replaced by adults who saw him as an obstacle. He leaned back, letting the weight of the revelation settle across his chest. "So that's what this is," he whispered. He didn't expect them to hear it. He wasn't speaking to them anymore. "This is betrayal." The word hung in the air, quiet but undeniable. Aaron stood abruptly, grabbing his coat as if offended by the silence. "We'll let the courts figure this out. It's for your own good." Michelle's screen went dark a second later, leaving only the dull reflection of Walt's living room in the glass. The house felt colder, emptier, the shadows stretching long against the walls. And as the front door closed behind Aaron, a single thought burned through Walt's mind, sharp enough to steady his breath. If they were willing to go this far already, what were they planning next? The knock came just after 10 in the morning, 3 short raps, polite but firm. Walt had been sitting at his kitchen table staring at the cold remains of breakfast, replaying yesterday's conversation with the kids in an endless loop. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but old instincts didn't let him sit still. He rose, straightening the collar of his flannel shirt before opening the door. A young officer stood on the porch, barely 30, hat tucked nervously under his arm. His eyes widened with recognition the moment he saw Walt. "Lieutenant Grayson?" he asked softly, though he already knew the answer. Walt nodded. The young man exhaled. "Sir, I'm really sorry. I've got a summons for you, court appearance, guardianship petition, and related charges." He held out the envelope like it weighed 100 pounds. I grew up hearing stories about you on the force. This feels wrong." Walt didn't trust his voice, so he simply took the envelope. His fingers felt clumsy. The officer shifted awkwardly, guilt clouding his expression. "I just want you to know I don't believe any of it." Walt managed a small, hollow smile. Your job, son. I understand." The old command tone slipped naturally into place, not harsh, just steady. He signed the delivery slip with practiced efficiency, each pen stroke muscle memory from decades of paperwork. But when the officer left and the cruiser rolled down the street, the calm evaporated. Walt set the envelope on the counter, and only then did the tremor start. It wasn't fear. He'd handled worse in uniform. It was betrayal, settling deep into his bones, shaking him more than any suspect with a weapon ever had. He braced his hands against the countertop until the tremor subsided. Minutes later, the front door swung open without knocking. Only one person in Walt's life still walked in like that. "Walt," Tom Jacobs' gravelly voice carried through the kitchen before the man himself appeared, breathless and angry. His silver hair was wind-tossed, and his jacket hung off one shoulder like he'd thrown it on while sprinting. "I heard," Tom growled. "A summons from your kids." He slapped his hand on the counter hard enough to rattle the dishes. Your own damn kids, Walt. This smells rotten, rancid rotten. Walt didn't argue. He slid the fresh envelope across the table. Tom read only the header before muttering a string of curses that would have gotten him written up back in their patrol days. Elder neglect, guardianship. Are they out of their minds? Walt sank into a chair. They're serious, Tom. Serious about what? Tom shot back. Selling you off like old equipment, taking everything you built. Walt hesitated, then reached for the folder he kept tucked under the table. It was old, leather-bound, the same one he'd updated yearly after his wife died. He opened it to the financial summary. The cabin, he said quietly. I had it appraised last year. It's worth $1.8 million now with the new development land rising around it. Tom's eyebrows shot up. 1.8 Jesus, and your pension still intact. Walt nodded, every cent. Tom leaned back slowly, connecting the pieces like a detective revisiting a cold case. Then this isn't about concern. It's not about your health. This is a play, a setup. He tapped the summons. They get guardianship, they get control. They sell the cabin, tap into your pension. And you get tucked away somewhere quiet, Walt finished for him. The words felt like ash in his mouth. Tom's expression softened with something almost paternal. Walt, you gave those kids everything. You bled for that family, and now they're framing you for a payday. His voice cracked with fury he didn't bother hiding. I swear I could wring their necks. Walt closed the folder gently. I don't want revenge. Tom scoffed. You don't need revenge, you need defense, and you need it now. Walt knew he was right. He wasn't facing a misunderstanding or a temporary flare of resentment. This was a coordinated attack, and if the last 48 hours proved anything, it was that Aaron and Daniel were willing to push the law as far as it could go. Michelle, he wasn't sure about anymore, but she had still signed those papers. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, feeling the weight of 72 years pressing on him. I need an attorney, he murmured. A real one, someone sharp. Tom nodded vigorously. Then call the best. Don't you dare try to do this alone. Walt thought for a moment. One name rose above the rest, someone respected, relentless, and not afraid to take on messy family cases. He reached for his phone, hesitating only long enough to swallow the last of his pride. Ava Larkin, he said under his breath. I hope she still takes private clients. Tom folded his arms. Call her now. Walt dialed. The ringtone echoed through the quiet kitchen. After a few seconds, a crisp female voice answered, Ava Larkin's office. Walt cleared his throat. My name is Walter Grayson. I need help. There was a pause, measured, assessing, before she replied, Tell me what they've done. Walt exhaled shakily. And the battle truly began. Ava Larkin's office overlooked downtown Charlotte, a clean corner suite with sharp angles, glass walls, and the quiet hum of air vents that always reminded Walt of interrogation rooms. She greeted him with a firm handshake, her presence crisp and controlled, the kind of confidence that came from winning more battles than she lost. Walt followed her into a conference room where a file already sat on the table, thick with printed reports and highlighted notes. I pulled everything they submitted, Ava said, slipping on her reading glasses. Let's go through it together. Walt braced himself as she opened the folder. She flipped the first page toward him. Allegation of caregiver neglect. Beneath it, his name appeared next to phrases he had never imagined being associated with. Failure to maintain safe environment, emotional instability, risk to dependence. Ava's voice cut through his disbelief. They're claiming you're incapable of basic self-care, that you're declining mentally and emotionally. Walt blinked, unsure whether to laugh or rage. I live alone, he said. I've lived alone for years. Who exactly am I neglecting? That, Ava replied, is the first flaw in their case. But guardianship petitions don't need strong logic, they need momentum. She turned another page, emotional endangerment. They're accusing you of unpredictable mood swings, isolation, erratic behavior. Walt stared at the accusations like they were written in a foreign language. Isolation, he muttered. I'm 72, I'm retired. That's not isolation, that's a quiet life. Ava tapped her pen on the table, her expression unreadable. Your children know exactly how this looks on paper. The courts err on the side of caution. Now, she lifted her eyes, tell me something honestly. Anyone in this situation who might be financially motivated? The question hung in the air like a held breath. Walt's instinct was to defend them, reflex muscle memory from decades of fatherhood. But the images from the last few days resurfaced. Aaron's smug posture in the living room, Michelle's guarded eyes on the video call, the silence that followed his attempts to connect. And Daniel, coiled behind it all like a shadow. He swallowed hard. Aaron, he finally said, and maybe Daniel, Michelle, I don't know anymore. Ava didn't react with surprise. She simply wrote a note. It's more common than you think. Guardianship is a legal door with a big financial reward behind it. Whoever gets control of your estate gets the keys. She closed the folder gently. People do ugly things when they believe they're entitled. Walt sat back, the words settling heavy in his chest. Entitled. It described Aaron too well. The way he expected life to hand him more than he earned. The way he had always looked at the cabin like it was waiting for him. A knock sounded on the conference room door and Detective Carla Monroe stepped in. She was tall, composed, with eyes that saw everything and judged nothing too quickly. Mr. Grayson, she said warmly, mind if I ask a few questions? Ava nodded for him to proceed, staying seated but attentive. Monroe took out a small recorder. These are voluntary questions regarding the petition filed by your children. I'm reviewing both sides of the situation. Walt answered calmly, decades of training guiding his tone. He explained his daily routines, his independence, his health, the normalcy of his life. Monroe listened carefully, typing notes with methodical precision. When she asked about incidents Aaron and Michelle had described, Walt felt his jaw tighten. What incident last month? He asked. The one where they claim I forgot to turn off the stove. Monroe glanced at her notes. Aaron stated it was left on overnight. It wasn't, Walt replied quietly. I remember that night, every detail. She studied him, really studied him. Then she nodded slowly, a subtle acknowledgement. There are inconsistencies in their statements, she said. I'm following up. Ava's eyes flicked toward Walt, a silent signal. This is a break but not a victory. Monroe finished the interview and closed her notebook. Mr. Grayson, if anything changes, if anyone contacts you about this case, let me know immediately. She gave Ava a respectful nod and stepped out. The moment the door shut, Ava leaned forward. Walt, listen to me. Her voice dropped to a low, deliberate tone. Say very little to anyone. Don't defend yourself to neighbors. Don't confront your kids. Don't respond to accusations. Every reaction becomes part of the story they're crafting. Walt frowned. You think they're building a narrative? I know they are, she said. And right now they're counting on you to panic. Don't give them anything to weaponize. He looked down at his hands, hands that had carried his children, held his wife through sickness, written thousands of police reports with unwavering steadiness. Now they seemed foreign, as if belonging to someone the world had already judged guilty. His chest tightened with a grief so deep it didn't feel like sorrow, it felt like burial. The realization crept through him with cold certainty. This wasn't just a legal trap. It was emotional, personal, deliberate. His children were building a cage around him, bar by bar, page by page. Ava gathered the documents, her voice steady. We'll fight this, but you need to be ready. They're not stopping here. Walt nodded slowly. But inside, one question burned, raw and unanswered. How far were his children willing to go? The Mecklenburg County Courthouse always smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a scent that usually eased Walt's nerves. He'd walked these halls for decades, testifying, investigating, watching justice grind slowly but inevitably forward. But today, as he stepped through the double doors of courtroom 4B, that familiar scent turned his stomach. Ava walked beside him, her expression calm but sharpened for battle. She rested a hand lightly on his arm before they entered. "Stay steady," she murmured. "We only respond if necessary." Walt nodded, though his heartbeat carried the weight of betrayal with every pulse. Inside, the room was half full, reporters, a few curious locals, and the hushed murmurs of courthouse staff. Then Walt saw them. Aaron sat at the petitioner's table, jaw tight, shoulders squared as if preparing to deliver a performance. Beside him, Daniel leaned back in his chair, legs casually stretched out, his smirk small but unmistakable. They looked like men attending a meeting they expected to win. Walt's chest tightened. Ava guided him to their table. "Remember," she whispered, "we let them reveal themselves." Before Walt could respond, the bailiff called the room to order. The side door opened, and Judge Henry Calloway stepped up to the bench. His presence alone shifted the air. Calloway was nearly Walt's age, with iron-gray hair and a face marked by decades of decisions that carried real consequences. Walt had worked alongside him back when Calloway was still a prosecutor, long nights sorting through evidence, quiet conversations over black coffee. They weren't friends, but they were bonded by a kind of professional respect that didn't crack easily. Calloway adjusted his glasses, preparing to look over the docket. But then his gaze lifted. It swept the courtroom, calm, measured, until it landed on the complainant's table. "Aaron." "Daniel." Something in Calloway's posture changed instantly, a subtle stillness but sharp enough for Walt to notice. The judge's eyes narrowed, not with scrutiny but recognition. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It lasted only a second, but the shift was unmistakable. Then came the freeze. Complete, startled, visceral. Calloway's hand hovered above the docket as though suspended by an invisible tension. His eyes locked on Daniel first, long enough that even Daniel's smirk twitched into unease, then flicked to Aaron. The recognition in the judge's expression was unmistakable, and beneath it something else. Fear. Ava noticed too. Her lips pressed together the way they did when she identified an opening in an opponent's case. She leaned toward Walt, whispering, "He knows something." Calloway cleared his throat, but the sound was off, strained, as though forcing himself back into motion. "Petitioners," he said, his voice a touch too formal, "step forward." Aaron and Daniel stood. Aaron straightened his tie, Daniel smoothed his jacket, both trying to project calm. But their movements weren't as confident as before, and as they stepped to the center, they avoided looking at the judge directly. Walt felt something shift inside him, a flicker of hope he didn't trust yet. Calloway stared at the two men before him. Silence stretched, too long for a procedural hearing, too long for anything routine. "Approach the bench," he finally said. Ava raised an eyebrow, surprised. Calloway rarely asked for private discussion this early. Even Walt, who had seen thousands of hearings, couldn't recall a moment like this. A hush swept through the room as the judge gestured to the bailiff. "Sidebar, now." Ava rose with Walt but stopped when Calloway lifted a hand. "Counsel only." She shot Walt a reassuring nod and stepped forward with the prosecutor. Aaron and Daniel followed reluctantly, their confidence unraveling in small, jittery movements, the tapping of Aaron's thumb against his thigh, the way Daniel avoided the judge's gaze. At the bench, Calloway leaned in. His voice was low, but the tension in it rippled through the entire courtroom. Walt watched Ava's posture tighten as she listened, her eyes darting between the prosecutor and the judge with growing intrigue. Daniel shifted uneasily. Aaron swallowed hard. Whatever Calloway was saying, it wasn't routine. It wasn't procedural. It was significant. The sidebar lasted less than a minute, but to Walt it felt like an hour, his breath held, his mind racing through every possibility. Did Calloway know about Daniel's past? About Aaron's sealed records, something darker, something buried. When the sidebar ended, the judge returned to his seat with a deliberate slowness, the kind that told Walt a choice had been made. He lifted his gavel but didn't strike it. Instead, he spoke clearly, each word landing with the weight of something irreversible. "This motion," he said, "is delayed. Significant concerns have arisen regarding the petition and the supporting materials. We will not proceed today." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Walt stared at the judge, unable to mask his confusion. At the petitioner's table, Aaron's face drained of color. Daniel's jaw twitched. They exchanged a look, not of frustration but of anxiety. Real anxiety. Ava sat down beside Walt, her expression controlled but triumphant. "Something just cracked," she whispered. Walt kept his eyes on the judge, whose stern gaze lingered first on Daniel, then on Aaron. The freeze had meant something. And as the courtroom emptied around him, Walt felt a slow realization rise in his chest. A door had opened. A door they never expected. And whatever lay behind it was about to change everything. The courthouse hallway had mostly emptied by the time Walt and Ava stepped out of courtroom 4B. The echo of the judge's ruling still clung to the air, motion delayed. Significant concerns have arisen. Walt replayed those 6 words again and again, trying to decipher what Calloway had seen, what he had recognized. A bailiff approached them quietly. "Mr. Grayson," he said, leaning in with a respectful nod, "Judge Calloway would like to see you in his chambers, alone." Ava stiffened. "That's irregular." "It's voluntary," the bailiff replied, "but he asked specifically." Walt glanced at her. She gave him a tight nod, the kind that meant go but tread carefully. He followed the bailiff down a side hallway, past framed portraits of judges long retired, until they reached a heavy oak door. The bailiff opened it and gestured inside. Judge Henry Calloway stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the city like a man debating something heavy. When Walt stepped in, Calloway turned, slowly, deliberately. "Walt," he said, his voice softer than it had been in court, "close the door." Walt did. An uneasy silence settled between them. Calloway removed his glasses and set them on the desk. "I owe you an explanation," he asked. "Aid, or at least context." Walt waited, muscles tight. "You saw my reaction," the judge continued. "I didn't hide it well, and I'm not going to pretend I don't know why this case feels wrong." He motioned for Walt to sit. "Years ago, before I was on the bench, I handled an investigation involving your son-in-law." Walt felt his breath catch. "Daniel." Calloway nodded. "Financial fraud. Not petty fraud either, structured transfers, shell accounts, falsified business losses. He was connected to a small ring operating through fake contracting companies." The judge exhaled through his nose. "We had enough evidence to prosecute. Then, overnight, the case was buried." Walt frowned. "Buried how?" "Higher offices," Calloway said quietly. "Someone with influence intervened. Files sealed, charges dropped, and Daniel walked. I never got a straight answer, but I remembered his face." He paused, eyes narrowing with old frustration. "And I remembered what he was capable of." Walt sat back, letting the knowledge sink in. It felt like cold water slowly filling his lungs. Daniel wasn't just manipulative, he was seasoned in it. Calloway continued. "Then there's Aaron." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Your son had a sealed arrest in his 20s. Juvenile court transferred the record, so technically it shouldn't affect current proceedings. But I remember it because I was the assistant DA who handled the intake." Walt's heart thumped painfully. "What arrest?" "Attempted fraud," Calloway said. "Using your name on a loan application. He was 21, young enough that the system treated it as a mistake." He lifted a hand before Walt could speak. "I am not suggesting these past actions will be admissible. They won't be, and I cannot, under any circumstances, intervene improperly in your case." "I understand," Walt murmured, and he did. Judges had boundaries, but the truth stung more than any legal obstacle. His son had once stolen from him, lied to him, and Walt never knew. Calloway's expression softened. "But I can slow the proceedings, ensure proper scrutiny, make certain no one rushes this through on misleading claims." He placed a steady hand on Walt's shoulder. "You deserve that much, at minimum." A complicated swell of gratitude and grief churned through Walt's chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Truly." Calloway nodded, though his eyes carried a sadness Walt didn't fully understand. "This isn't over, Walt, and it won't be easy, but at least now you know what you're up against." Walt stepped out of chambers feeling heavier and lighter at the same time, two conflicting truths fighting for space inside him. Daniel had a criminal past. Aaron had lied before. Pieces of a puzzle he wished never existed now sat starkly in place. Ava was waiting for him at the end of the hallway, arms crossed. "Well?" she asked. Walt relayed the judge's words to her carefully, every detail, every revelation. She didn't react with surprise or outrage. Instead, she processed it with the cold precision of someone assembling a strategy. "Good," she finally said. "This gives us leverage, not victory, but leverage." Walt nodded, though his throat tightened. "It's worse than I thought." "It usually is," Ava replied softly. "But knowledge is power, and now we know exactly where the cracks are." Walt looked back toward the judge's chambers, a shadow lingering in his heart. He had wanted answers, and he'd received them. But those answers carried consequences, ones that would reshape everything that came next. He drew a slow breath and prepared himself for escalation. The shift began quietly, so quietly that Walt almost missed it. But within a week of Calloway delaying the motion, the tone of the neighborhood changed. It started with Mrs. Plimpton across the street. Usually cheerful, always eager to wave, she suddenly avoided eye contact when Walt stepped out to check his mail. She hurried inside before he could speak. Then Mr. Caldwell, who Walt had known for 20 years, crossed the street rather than walk past him. Conversation stopped when he approached the local grocery store. People whispered, glancing at him as if he carried some invisible stain. Aaron and Daniel had begun their campaign. "Your father's slipping," they told neighbors. "He forgets where he is, he's getting aggressive, we're just trying to keep him safe." Daniel, with his faux charm and salesman confidence, played the role perfectly, concerned son-in-law trying to protect the family patriarch. And Aaron, with his polished vocabulary and forced humility, backed every lie with just enough detail to sound believable. Within days, the neighborhood believed Walt was losing it. Ava warned him it would happen. "The court of public opinion moves faster than any legal system," she'd said. "They want to isolate you, make you look unstable, don't respond." But knowing and living through it were two different things. Online things were worse. Michelle, whose voice had always been softest in the family, posted vague, cryptic messages. Sometimes parents can be toxic too. Protecting your mental health starts with hard choices. Family doesn't always mean safe. It didn't mention Walt by name, but everyone knew. The comments filled in the blanks. Sympathy poured in. Friends offered her prayers. People encouraged her to stay strong. Walt read them once, just once. Then he closed his laptop and didn't open it again for 2 days. The real blow came during the formal interview at the county office. The room smelled of disinfectant and ink, sterile, bureaucratic, suffocating. A recorder sat on the table. Detective Monroe was present as an observer, her expression calmly neutral. 2 social services investigators sat across from Walt. And then, to Walt's disbelief, Daniel pulled up a chair on the petitioner's side, armed with documents and an expression rehearsed for sympathy. "We just want him to be safe," Daniel began, voice soft, eyes wide. "He forgets important things. He leaves appliances running. He gets confused. Last month he didn't recognize Michelle for a moment." "That never happened," Walt said, steady but firm. Daniel placed a hand over his chest, wounded. We love him, but love can't blind us to reality. Ava leaned forward. Mr. Reeves, you're not family. You're not a medical professional. You're inserting yourself into someone else's petition. Daniel smiled tightly. I'm here because I care, and because Michelle is fragile right now. Every sentence dripped poison. He described Walt as unstable, erratic, prone to emotional outbursts. He fabricated stories, claiming Walt had wandered out of the house late at night, claiming he forgot important dates, claiming he had become paranoid and distrustful. Walt felt his pulse hammering in his ears. But Ava watched Daniel with the patience of a chess player waiting for her opponent to overextend. Twice, she interrupted to demand clarification. You say he forgot where he was, she said, but you also claim he drove halfway across the city that same night without difficulty. Which one is it, Mr. Reeves? Daniel stuttered. It varies. And you said the stove incident happened in June, Ava continued. But in your written statement you listed August, which is correct. Daniel blinked, sweat formed at his temple. It must have been around then. Ava's tone never rose, never accused, never ridiculed. She simply exposed inconsistencies like peeling wallpaper from a rotting wall. When the interview ended, Walt felt exhausted but slightly steadier. Ava gathered her notes and whispered, We're catching him slipping, but we still need proof, hard proof. As they stood to leave, Detective Monroe approached them quietly. I'm looking into Daniel, she said, voice low so others wouldn't hear. Deeper than before, financials, employment history, old companies. If there's anything connected to that buried case, I'll find it. Ava gave a small nod of appreciation, but Walt saw something else in Monroe's eyes, concern, maybe even warning. Daniel wasn't some amateur manipulator. He had a history, a practiced talent for deceit. That evening, Tom showed up unannounced, pacing the living room like a retired cop ready to kick down a door. They're desperate, Walt, he growled. And desperate people slip up. They always do. Trust me, we just need the moment they crack. Walt didn't answer right away. He stared at the window, watching the dim streetlights blur against the quiet neighborhood that no longer felt like home. Something inside him shifted. The ache of betrayal was still there, sharp, raw, but it no longer froze him. It hardened him, sharpened him. This isn't just a misunderstanding, Walt finally murmured. They're building something around me, a cage. Tom placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Then break it. Walt inhaled slowly. The pain was still there, but beneath it, colder and steadier, something else was forming. Determination. And he knew with absolute clarity. The next move had to be his. Tom Jacobs had always been rough around the edges, but subtle when it mattered. And on a cold Wednesday afternoon, he proved it. He'd run into Aaron at a local hardware store, one of those accidental run-ins that wasn't accidental at all. Tom kept his phone in his pocket, the voice memo app already running before he approached. He found Aaron in the lumber aisle, leaning over a cart like a man surveying a future he already believed he owned. Tom greeted him casually, masking the disgust he felt. Heard about the guardianship mess, he said, tossing a box of nails into his basket. Heavy stuff, huh? Aaron smirked, the same cocky tilt that had irritated Walt since the boy turned 13. It's necessary, he said, voice dripping with self-importance. Dad's finally becoming useful. Tom blinked, useful. Aaron chuckled, lowering his voice but not enough. Well, the property is anyway. That cabin's worth a fortune now, and it's just city. And gee there. Once the guardianship goes through, at least we can put it to good use. Tom's stomach twisted, but he kept the conversation going, nodding along until Aaron added, honestly, it's about time that place paid off. That line, cold, greedy, became gold. The moment Aaron walked away, Tom ended the recording and sent it straight to Ava with the caption, "Use this." By that evening, Walt and Ava sat in her office, the phone placed between them like a detonator. She pressed play. Aaron's voice filled the room, arrogant, careless, incriminating. Walt's heart tightened at the sound. That was his son, his firstborn, the boy he'd taught to ride a bike, the child who once cried when Walt missed a school play. And now he was bragging about stripping Walt's life down to assets. Ava listened without emotion, her eyes locked on the table. When the recording ended, she leaned back. "It's good," she said. "Very good." Tom pounded his fist lightly on the armchair. "Good, that's a confession." Ava raised a hand. "It's leverage, but it's not a confession to a crime. It's motive. Motive matters, but we need proof of coordinated fraud or coercion to break the guardianship petition apart." Walt rubbed his temples. "So this isn't enough." "It's a piece of the puzzle," Ava said, "but it's a strong one." She wasn't wrong. Walt didn't expect a magic fix, but hearing Aaron speak about him like a commodity carved something deep into him, a wound that would take years to close. Later that week, Detective Monroe met with Walt in the courthouse lobby, speaking quietly near the vending machines. "I dug further," she said, handing him a folder. "Daniel's financial trail is messy, extremely messy." Walt opened the folder. "Hidden credit card debt," Monroe explained. 3 cards in collections, 2 accounts tied to shell companies, thousands missing from a joint account he shares with Michelle. Walt felt a bitter ache rise in his chest. Michelle didn't know. He could feel it. Daniel had always been secretive with money, but this was a different level of deception. "Anything we can use?" he asked. "I'm getting warrants," Monroe replied. "Slowly, I want everything by the book." Her thoroughness gave him a small measure of comfort. That night at almost 1 in the morning, Walt's phone lit up. "Michelle." He answered instantly. "Michelle," he whispered. A shaky breath came through the line. "Dad, then silence. A click," she hung up. Walt stared at the screen, heart pounding. She'd called 3 times in the past week. Always late, always hanging up. Something inside her was cracking. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, maybe both. But she wasn't ready to talk, not yet. The next morning, Aaron showed up in Walt's driveway unannounced, storming up the walkway with the force of a man who believed the world owed him results. "You think delaying the hearing changes anything?" Aaron snapped. "You think a judge is gonna save you from yourself?" Walt opened the door slowly, keeping his face calm. Aaron stepped closer, voice rising. "I'm done waiting, done with delays. We're finishing the guardianship, Dad, whether you like it or not." He said the words like a threat, not concern. Spit flew with each syllable. His eyes were cold, no hesitation, no remorse. Walt felt his chest tighten, but he didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't plead. Ava's voice echoed in his mind, "Don't react emotionally. They're building a narrative." So Walt simply said, "I hear you." Aaron scoffed, "That's all you have to say." Walt stepped back inside, hands steady on the door. "For now." Aaron cursed under his breath and walked away, slamming his car door so hard the windows rattled. Walt watched him drive off, dust rising behind the tires. And this time, the hurt didn't crush him. It focused him. His children weren't just making mistakes, they were making moves. Dangerous ones, calculated ones. Walt inhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. If they wanted a war of strategy, they were about to get one. The gravel road leading to Walt's cabin had always calmed him. The trees arched overhead like guardians, the late fall wind whispering through brittle leaves. The cabin had been his refuge since the day he bought the land with his wife. Her laughter still lived in the walls. But today, as Walt turned into the clearing, something felt wrong. The front door was ajar. Not slightly open, pried open. Splintered wood clung to the frame, nails bent outward. Walt killed the engine and stepped out slowly, every instinct from his policing years rising like a warning siren in his chest. He pushed the door with 2 fingers. It creaked inward, revealing chaos. Papers littered the floor like fallen snow. His desk drawers were yanked out and overturned. The rug near the fireplace was shoved aside, and the safe, bolted beneath the floorboards for decades, sat exposed. Its steel door hung open, the lock mechanism ripped apart. Someone had known exactly where to look. Walt stepped inside, boots crunching. Unscattered documents. His breath caught as he saw what was missing. The file labeled Property Deed GRAYSON Cabin. Everything else was there: tax records, insurance forms, old receipts. Only one folder had been taken. They weren't burglars. They were hunters. He crouched near the safe, running his fingers along the warped metal. The crack wasn't from brute force. It was clean, controlled, professional. Not the work of amateurs, not random vandalism. This was targeted. He called Detective Monroe immediately. She arrived within the hour, her unmarked cruiser kicking up dust as it rolled into the clearing. She stepped out, gloved up, and moved through the cabin with methodical precision. Walt watched from the doorway, fists clenched at his sides. Monroe knelt beside the safe, her brow tightening. These cut marks, they're familiar. Walt frowned. Familiar how? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took out a small flashlight and angled it across the steel, highlighting the grooves. These are tool signatures, she explained. Every break-in tool, especially modified ones, leaves a unique pattern. She looked up at him. And I've seen this pattern before. Walt felt a cold pulse shoot down his spine. Where? In a file, Monroe said. From a fraud case years back. A contracting job, specialized break-ins. The same tool marks showed up in evidence tied to Daniel Reeves. Walt's breath hitched. Daniel. Monroe nodded. I can't accuse him yet, but this wasn't random. Whoever did this knew exactly where to look and what to take. Walt felt the room tilt. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It wasn't suspicion. It was real. They were coming for everything, through the courts, through public opinion, and now physically. Monroe photographed the scene while Walt stepped outside to steady himself. The cold air bit his lungs, but it grounded him enough to make the next call. Ava answered on the second ring. Walt, what's wrong? They broke in, he said, voice tight. The cabin, safes cracked, deeds gone. Ava muttered something under her breath, followed by the rustle of papers. This escalates things, dramatically. They were looking for the deed, Walt said. They need it if they want to make a sale look clean after guardianship. Ava didn't deny it. I'm filing an emergency motion. Tonight. If they're escalating, so are we. We're blocking the guardianship attempt until we establish criminal interference. Walt closed his eyes, relief and anger twisting together. Thank you. This isn't a thank you moment, Ava replied. This is war, and you need to be ready for what comes next. Monroe stepped outside then, removing her gloves with slow, controlled movements. Walt, she said, I'm going to request a formal forensic team, but listen to me carefully. This was no spontaneous crime. Someone planned this. Walt nodded. I know. And whoever did it, she continued, will get bolder. People like Daniel don't step back when they're cornered. They double down. He swallowed hard. Hearing it out loud made the truth sharper. Monroe gave his arm a reassuring pat before driving off, her tires crunching through fallen leaves. Walt stayed a moment longer outside the cabin, staring at the pried-open door, the wound carved into the place that had once been his sanctuary. Rage tugged at him, thick and tempting. But over the last few weeks, he'd learned something important. Emotion was what his enemies wanted from him. Strategy was what they feared. He turned toward his truck, pulling himself together piece by piece. Ava was filing motions. Monroe was digging deeper. Tom was gathering evidence. And now Walt had something he hadn't had since the start. a clear view of the battlefield. As he climbed into the truck, the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground, shadows that looked like bars of a cage someone had tried to lock around him. But now, for the first time, Walt felt the lock weakening. The countermove had begun, and his children had no idea what was coming. The courthouse felt colder than usual when Walt and Ava stepped inside for what they thought would be a routine procedural check-in. Ava carried a slim folder, expecting a short hearing, nothing more. Walt felt a low, steady tension in his chest, but he trusted Ava's plan and Judge Calloway's caution. But the moment they approached courtroom 3C, Ava stopped mid-step. Aaron and Daniel were already there, standing with a prosecutor Walt had never seen before. Aaron looked jittery but determined, jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched. Daniel, dressed too sharply for a casual hearing, gave Walt a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ava's hand slowly lowered from the door handle. Something's wrong. Before either of them could move, the bailiff stepped forward. Emergency petition filed by the petitioners. The judge will hear it immediately. Ava blinked. Emergency petition filed when? This morning, the bailiff said. Claims of escalating danger. Walt felt his stomach turn. Dangerous. That word had power. It carried legal weight. It painted him as unstable, violent, a threat to himself or others, the kind of label the court wouldn't ignore. Ava gripped Walt's arm. Stay calm, don't react. But inside, Walt felt a familiar pressure, the tightening in the ribcage he used to feel in interrogation rooms when a suspect lied straight to his face. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Judge Calloway sat on the bench, posture rigid, eyes already narrowed. Something about his stillness felt different from last time, not cautious but bracing. Aaron stepped forward immediately, shoving a thick stack of papers onto the clerk's desk. Your Honor, he said, voice trembling with forced sincerity, we've had no choice but to file an emergency petition. Our father is becoming a danger to himself, and to others. Walt felt his throat constrict, but Ava squeezed his arm, a silent warning. Don't speak. Michelle appeared on a video call projected on the screen. Her face was pale, hair pulled back tightly, her fingers fidgeting in and out of frame. Dad, please, she whispered, though the microphone warped her voice. You need help. Calloway's eyes moved from the papers to Michelle, then back down. His expression hardened. Ava stepped forward. Your Honor, we object to these late filings. This wasn't scheduled, nor are the accusations supported by any verified evidence. But Aaron was ready. He pointed to the affidavit. We have new evaluations. A therapist assessed his behavior last week. He's showing signs of paranoia, aggression, decline. A therapist? Walt shook his head in disbelief. Calloway flipped through the documents, his eyes scanning faster with each page. The courtroom fell into a tense hush, the kind of silence where everyone waits for something to break. Ava watched the judge closely. Your Honor, something is off. Calloway didn't respond. He kept reading, his brow furrowed, his jaw set, and then, halfway down the affidavit, he stopped. Completely. He lowered the paper, his eyes lifted sharply to Aaron and Daniel. Who is Dr. Lyle Crenshaw? Aaron stiffened. He's the therapist he evaluated. No, Calloway interrupted, voice cutting across the room with lethal precision. I asked who he is. Aaron blinked rapidly. A licensed therapist, he. Calloway slammed the document on his bench. There is no Dr. Lyle Crenshaw licensed in this state, not currently, not previously, not ever. Daniel shifted, tugging at his collar. Ava's eyes widened and she whispered to Walt, here it comes. Calloway turned the affidavit to the clerk. This signature is invalid. The license number listed belongs to a veterinarian who retired 6 years ago. A faint gasp rippled across the courtroom. Michelle's face on the screen paled further. I didn't know, Daniel said. Daniel stepped forward quickly, trying to salvage the moment. Your Honor, there must be some mix-up. Maybe the evaluator used an old. Enough, Calloway snapped. The authority in his voice made even the bailiff flinch. The judge leaned forward, fingers interlaced, eyes drilling into Aaron and Daniel. This petition relies on fraudulent documentation, fraud intended to manipulate a court into stripping a man of his rights. Daniel opened his mouth again, but this time his words stumbled out, tangled and incoherent. We were just trying maybe the wrong. You submitted it, Calloway said. You swore it under oath. You presented it as fact. A heavy silence filled the room, thick, suffocating. Then Calloway spoke the words that shifted the entire case. Emergency petition denied. All proceedings frozen until a formal investigation is conducted. Fraud has been detected. Aaron's body jerked as if struck. Daniel stared at the floor, jaw working but producing no sound. Michelle on the screen covered her mouth, eyes filling with panic. Ava leaned closer to Walt, her voice a whisper filled with quiet triumph. We have them. Walt didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply breathed, a long, exhausted breath he felt all the way to his bones. Because the truth had finally cracked through the lies. As the bailiff dismissed the parties and people began to shuffle out, Walt turned slightly, catching Aaron's gaze for the briefest moment. Aaron looked terrified. And in that instant, Walt sensed it, the shift in power, subtle but undeniable. A door had opened again. But this time, it was the door leading straight into the heart of their deception. And Walt knew. The next move was going to expose everything. Detective Carla Monroe moved like a blade, clean, precise, and aimed with purpose. Within 48 hours of Judge Calloway freezing the guardianship proceedings, she filed a subpoena for Daniel Reeves, financial records. It wasn't easy. Daniel had wrapped his money trails in layers of shell companies, burner accounts, and fabricated invoices. But Monroe had hunted bigger fish, and she followed the smallest deviation like a scent. When the records finally arrived, she spread them across her desk under a harsh fluorescent lamp. What emerged wasn't a messy ledger. It was a map of desperation. 3 outstanding debts to known loan sharks. 4 fake LLCs registered to vacant properties. Thousands unaccounted for. An entire life built on financial illusions. Monroe leaned back, exhaling through her teeth. Daniel wasn't just manipulative. He was cornered, and cornered men were the most dangerous kind. That same evening, as shadows stretched long across Walt's living room, someone knocked, softly, hesitantly. Walt opened the door and felt his heart stutter. Michelle stood there, shoulders trembling, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She looked younger than her 38 years, like the girl who used to curl up against his shoulder after bad dreams. But now her bad dream was standing right in front of her, and Walt realized he had become part of the nightmare she was trapped in. Dad, her voice cracked, I can't do this anymore. He stepped aside instantly, guiding her in. She collapsed onto the couch, hands covering her face. For a long moment she just sobbed, her whole body shuddering like years of guilt were finally breaking loose. Walt sat beside her, giving her space but staying close enough for her to feel safe. Michelle wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Daniel, he made me sign the affidavit, she whispered. I didn't want to. He said if I didn't help him and Aaron, they'd cut me off financially. He said, her breath hitched. He said you wouldn't understand anyway. Walt's jaw tightened, not in anger at her but in the weight of everything she'd been carrying. Michelle, look at me, he said gently. She lifted her red, swollen eyes. You're my daughter. You can tell me the truth, all of it. Her lips trembled. Aaron wants your pension, she finally confessed. He's drowning in debt he won't admit to. He keeps saying your retirement money could fix everything. Daniel promised he'd help Aaron get access to it once they had guardianship. She shook her head, sobbing again. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know about the cabin break-in. I didn't know it would go this far." Walt reached out and held her hand, warm, trembling, familiar. "Michelle, I'm not angry," he said softly. "But I need you to be honest in court. No more half-truths, no more silence." She nodded, tears falling freely. "I will, I swear it." For the first time in weeks, Walt felt a tiny fracture of light, small, fragile, but real. After Michelle left, Ava arrived within the hour, summoned by a single text from Walt. Michelle talked. Ava listened to every detail of the confession, her expression growing sharper and more focused with each word. When Walt finished, she closed her notebook slowly. "This changes everything," she said. "Her testimony will dismantle their credibility, and her admitting Daniel coerced her. That's leverage we can structure into our defense." Walt exhaled. "I just want the truth out." "And it will be," Ava replied. "But prepare yourself, Daniel won't let this go quietly." Her prediction was immediate. By the next morning, Michelle had left 3 frantic voicemails. Daniel had confronted her when she came home. He demanded to know where she'd gone, why her eyes were red, why she had that guilty look. When she refused to answer, he slammed a cabinet so hard it splintered. In one message, her voice shook. "Dad, he's calling me nonstop. He says I'm ruining everything. He's scaring me." Walt listened, fists clenching until his knuckles whitened. He had never felt so torn, between wanting to protect her and knowing this fight had to stay inside legal lines. Monroe called shortly after. "Your daughter is in danger emotionally. I'll be keeping an eye on him," she said. "And your son, he's not handling the pressure well either." The family, once unified by grief when Walt's wife passed, was now splintering at every seam. Walt could feel it. Aaron cracking under financial stress, Daniel unraveling under exposure, Michelle terrified and coming undone. Tom visited that afternoon, catching Walt on the porch. One look at Walt's face and Tom sighed heavily. "It's happening, isn't it? Everything falling apart." Walt nodded. "It's all unraveling." "And the truth?" Tom asked. Walt stared toward the horizon, where the fading sunlight blurred with the rising dusk. "The truth," he murmured, "is finally breaking through." But even as he said it, he sensed something darker coming, something the unraveling was exposing, piece by piece. The fractures were no longer just cracks. They were about to split the entire family wide open. Michelle arrived at Walt's house early in the morning, long before the neighborhood woke. Her hair was tied back in a loose knot, her clothes wrinkled, her face drained of sleep. But there was something else in her eyes now, resolve, thin but real, the kind that grows only after fear burns itself out. She stepped inside without speaking. Walt guided her to the kitchen table where 2 steaming mugs waited. She wrapped her hands around one, staring into the swirl of rising steam like it held answers. Finally, she exhaled. "I'll testify," she said. Those 2 words, small, trembling, shifted the entire energy in the room. Walt felt it physically, like a gust breaking through heavy air. "Michelle," he murmured, "are you sure?" Her nod was slow but firm. "Yes, I can't carry it anymore. I won't lie for them again." But the world outside her confession wasn't quiet. Within hours, Aaron caught wind of her decision. He called her nonstop, leaving voicemail after voicemail, some angry, some pleading, all drenched in the desperation of a man watching his plan collapse. "You're a traitor," he shouted in one message, voice cracking so violently it distorted through the speaker. "You're choosing him over your own family, over me." Another message came minutes later, softer, manipulative. "Please, Mitch, don't do this. You don't know what Dad's capable of. He's controlling you just like he controlled us growing up." Michelle deleted them without hesitation. But Daniel didn't hide behind voicemails. He confronted her directly in their kitchen, his voice low, controlled, a serpent tightening around its prey. "You testify," he said, "and I will divorce you. You'll be left with nothing." Michelle flinched but didn't back down. "Then leave," she whispered. "I'm done lying." Daniel's jaw twitched. His silence said everything. This wasn't the result he expected. Shaken but intact, Michelle returned to Walt's house. He found her in the living room, staring at the family photos on the shelf, Walt holding her at age 10, the three of them on a fishing pier, their mother smiling from behind the camera. "I never wanted this," she said quietly, "any of it." Walt stepped beside her. "I know. I didn't want to hurt you. I know." Her voice cracked. "Then why does it feel like I already have?" Walt reached out, resting a steady hand on her shoulder. "Because the truth is heavy," he said, "but it protects you. It always protects you." Her eyes filled, and she nodded, clinging to those words as if they anchored her. That afternoon, Detective Monroe arrived with new findings. She stood in the doorway, her expression grim and resolute. "We got confirmation," she said. "Daniel hired someone to break into your cabin." Michelle's breath hitched. He what?" Monroe nodded. "A contractor he paid through a fake LLC. The tool marks matched the same equipment used in one of Daniel's prior cases." Walt felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow tighten in his chest. Every suspicion, every uneasy instinct confirmed. Michelle turned pale, sinking into the nearest chair. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know." Walt sat beside her, placing a comforting hand over hers. "I believe you." But the weight of what she'd married into crushed her. The lies, the manipulation, the danger. She looked at Walt with fear threaded through her grief. "What happens now?" Before Walt could answer, Ava arrived, her briefcase full, her pace brisk, her tone razor-sharp. "Now," Ava said, "we organize. We build the case piece by piece." She spread papers across the table. Monroe's findings, Tom's recording, Michelle's written confession, financial data, inconsistencies in Aaron's affidavits. Every fracture in the narrative Aaron and Daniel built now laid out clearly. "This," Ava continued, "is the foundation. Michelle, your testimony will be pivotal, not emotional, not dramatic, just factual. You speak the truth and the court will see everything." Michelle swallowed hard. "I can do that." Ava offered a small, encouraging nod. "Good, then we're ready to move." Walt watched his daughter, pride and pain weaving together in a way he couldn't untangle. He wished she hadn't been pulled into this. He wished she hadn't been manipulated. He wished she hadn't needed to choose between loyalty and justice. But justice demanded sacrifice. And Michelle was finally choosing the right side. As Ava packed up and Monroe stepped outside to make a call, Michelle looked at Walt, her voice quiet but steady. "This is going to destroy what's left of the family, isn't it?" Walt didn't lie. "Yes," he said gently, "but sometimes things have to break before they can heal." Michelle wiped her eyes, breathing deeply. And in that quiet moment, Walt felt the storm gathering, the clash building, the truth sharpening, the final confrontation inching closer. They weren't just preparing for court. They were preparing for war. By the time Walt stepped into courtroom 4B, the air felt charged, thick with a tension that vibrated beneath the surface. Every seat was filled. Reporters lined the back wall, whispering into microphones. Spectators leaned forward, hungry for drama. The bailiff had to shout twice for order, and still the room buzzed like a nest ready to break open. Ava walked beside Walt, calm as a surgeon entering an operating room. Michelle trailed behind them, pale but resolute, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her statement. Detective Monroe was already seated, a neatly organized stack of folders by her side. Aaron and Daniel sat at the opposite table. Aaron looked hollow-eyed, angry in a way that bordered on frantic. Daniel wore a stiff smile, but sweat glistened at his temple. Judge Calloway entered, his gavel struck hard. "Court is now in session." He looked older today, like the weight of what he knew was finally settling into his bones. The clerk called the case. The tension was so thick it felt like a storm cloud lowering itself into the room. Ava rose first. Your Honor, the defense would like to call Michelle Grayson to the stand. A ripple passed through the audience. Michelle walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, as if she feared her own legs might betray her. She sat, the clerk administered the oath. Michelle's voice cracked slightly as she whispered, "I do." Ava approached gently. "Michelle, can you explain in your own words how the petition against your father began?" Michelle nodded, breath shaking. "Daniel pressured me," she said softly. "He said if I didn't help, he would leave me. He said Dad was a burden, that we needed control of his finances before things got worse." A murmur spread through the gallery. Michelle continued, "I didn't want to sign anything, but they told me Dad wouldn't cooperate, that he'd fight us, that he'd make things ugly. They said guardianship would protect him." Ava let the silence breathe. "Did you believe he was mentally declining?" "No," Michelle's voice strengthened. "That was a lie, I knew it, and I still helped them. I'm ashamed." Aaron shot up from his chair. "She's lying," he screamed. "Michelle, stop." The gavel cracked like thunder. "Mr. Grayson, sit down," Calloway barked. Aaron froze, breath heaving. Michelle turned toward her brother, tears pooling. "I'm not lying. You wanted Dad's pension, Aaron. You told me yourself. You said it was locked away doing nothing." Gasps erupted across the courtroom. Ava stepped aside. "No further questions." Judge Calloway nodded. "Detective Monroe, you may proceed." Monroe stood with a calm authority that silenced the chatter instantly. "Your Honor," she said, adjusting the microphone, "our investigation into Daniel Reeves uncovered financial inconsistencies directly tied to the motives behind the guardianship petition." She displayed a series of documents on the courtroom screen: bank statements, credit reports, shell company registrations. One by one, Monroe walked through them. "These accounts reflect significant debt owed to predatory lenders. Furthermore," she clicked the remote, "these LLCs were used to launder funds for fraudulent contracting bids." She turned toward Daniel. "And these tool mark matches confirm that the break-in at Mr. Grayson's cabin was committed by a hired individual connected to Mr. Reeves' former company." Daniel stiffened. His mask cracked just slightly, but Calloway saw it. A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom before the judge slammed the gavel again. "Order!" Ava stood once more. "Your Honor, the defense requests permission to present one final piece of evidence." Calloway nodded. "Proceed." Ava pressed a button on her tablet. Tom's secret recording filled the speakers, Aaron's voice echoing through the courtroom, smug and unguarded. "Dad's property is finally useful. Once the guardianship goes through, we can put it to good use. That cabin's worth a fortune." Each line hit like a hammer. Aaron surged from his chair. "That's out of context," he shouted. "He set me up. That old man set me up." Tom stood from the gallery. "No, son," he growled. "You did that to yourself." Aaron snapped. He lunged straight at Walt. Chairs toppled. Gasps exploded across the room as deputies moved in, grabbing Aaron by the arms and wrestling him back. "Get off me," he roared, eyes wild. "He ruined everything. He ruined my life." Walt didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply watched, heart heavy but steady. Aaron struggled, veins bulging, until finally the deputies pinned him against the table. Judge Calloway rose from the bench, and for a moment the room went silent again. He looked slowly from Aaron to Daniel, then to Michelle, then finally to Walt. In Calloway's eyes was devastation, not for Walt, but for what had happened to a family he once admired. Betrayal, greed, manipulation, all laid bare before the court. He spoke quietly, but his words carried a finality that cut through the room like a blade. "I have seen the truth." His gavel hovered, but did not fall. Not yet, because what came next would change everything. The courtroom sat in a suspended silence after Aaron's outburst, one of those heavy, airless pauses where every breath felt loud. Deputies kept Aaron pinned against the petitioner's table, his chest heaving, his face blotched red with panic and rage. Daniel stood frozen beside him, pale as paper, trying not to crumble. Michelle, still on the witness bench, covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Judge Calloway remained standing behind the bench, both hands planted firmly on the wood as though anchoring himself against a storm. His eyes swept slowly across the room, landing on each of the Graysons in turn. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, but it vibrated with barely contained fury. "This court has witnessed manipulation," he said. "Lies, coercion, and a calculated attempt to weaponize the guardianship system for personal gain." His gaze cut to Aaron first, sharp enough to make the younger man flinch. "Mr. Grayson, you petitioned this court under the guise of concern for your father's mental state, his safety, his ability to care for himself." Calloway leaned forward. "But what you truly sought was control. Financial control, personal control, control you believed you were entitled to." Aaron's breath rattled in his throat, his earlier fight drained into a defeated slump. Tears rimmed his eyes, but not from remorse. Fear had replaced the bravado. Calloway then turned to Daniel. "Mr. Reeves, your involvement in this matter is nothing short of predatory. You manipulated Mrs. Grayson. You orchestrated fraudulent documentation. You engaged a contractor, through one of your shell companies, to break into Mr. Grayson's cabin." Daniel swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table as if preparing to faint. His voice cracked. "Your Honor." "Do not speak." Calloway's voice struck like a hammer. "You will have ample opportunity when criminal charges are filed." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, reporters scribbling furiously. The deputies tightened their hold on Aaron. Walt sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, every muscle tense as he waited for something he hadn't felt since the beginning of this nightmare. Justice. Judge Calloway reached for a thick envelope the clerk handed him earlier. He lifted it slowly, deliberately. "Before I issue my ruling, there is one matter that must be addressed openly." He opened the envelope. Walt recognized the seal, the same one he'd seen on confidential internal files years ago. Judge Calloway pulled out a document and glanced at Aaron with a mixture of regret and disappointment. "Mr. Grayson," he said, "the court is now unsealing an older record, one relevant to your credibility." He tapped the paper. "At age 21, you attempted to fraudulently take out a loan in your father's name." Aaron's eyes widened, his knees buckled. That was sealed," he whispered. "Yes," Calloway replied. "But sealed records can be reviewed under judicial authority when credibility and intent are under scrutiny. And today, your intent is the very core of this proceeding." Michelle broke into quiet sobs in the back row, her shoulders shaking. Tom, seated beside her, placed a steady hand on her back. Calloway continued, voice low but unwavering. "These past actions do not define you entirely, Mr. Grayson, but coupled with your recent behavior, they paint a troubling picture, one the court cannot ignore." Next, the judge lifted another set of documents, Ava's filings, Monroe's evidence, the financial analysis. As for the claims of danger, incompetence, and mental decline, his eyes softened as he turned toward Walt. "There is not a single shred of credible evidence supporting them." Walt felt a breath catch in his lungs. "Mr. Walter Grayson," Calloway proclaimed, "is fully competent, mentally sound, and poses no danger to himself or others. Not today, not last year, not at any point relevant to this petition." A wave of emotion washed through Walt. Relief, pain, exhaustion tangled into one tight exhale he finally let out. His eyes stung, not with tears, but with the weight of everything he'd carried collapsing at last. Calloway straightened. "Therefore, the guardianship petition is dismissed with prejudice." A cry burst from Michelle, half grief, half release. She covered her face, her body shaking uncontrollably. Aaron sagged against the table, legs unable to support him. Daniel looked ready to be sick. But the judge wasn't done. In addition, Calloway said firmly, this court orders an immediate criminal investigation into both Mr. Aaron Grayson and Mr. Daniel Reeves for fraud, perjury, coercion, and unlawful tampering with evidence. The words struck like a thunderclap. Daniel's face drained of all color. Aaron whimpered something under his breath, incoherent and broken. Ava leaned slightly toward Walt, whispering, "It's over, you're free." Walt closed his eyes for a moment, not in triumph but in profound, aching relief. He had fought, endured, doubted, and hurt, but now the truth stood in front of the world, undeniable. He opened his eyes again, shoulders finally lowering. Judge Calloway lowered his gavel. But before it struck, he held Walt's gaze for a long moment, offering a quiet, solemn nod. Walt exhaled. For the first time in months, he could finally breathe. The courthouse felt different on sentencing day. Not tense, not frantic, just heavy, as though the building itself understood the weight of what was about to happen. Walt arrived early, stepping through the familiar glass doors with Tom by his side. The air smelled of old paper and polished floors, a scent he'd known for most of his adult life, but today it carried something else: finality. Ava joined them near the security checkpoint. "Today is closure," she said quietly. "It won't feel good, but it will be right." Walt nodded, though his stomach churned. Closure rarely came without cost. Inside courtroom 7A, the seats were packed. Reporters filled the back rows, murmuring about the Grayson case, which had become local news ever since Daniel's arrest. Michelle sat alone in the second row, hands folded tight, her eyes downcast. When she looked up and saw Walt enter, she stood instinctively, guilt and gratitude flickering across her face. He gave her a gentle nod that said everything and nothing at once. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Calloway did not enter. Instead, a younger judge, stern, composed, unfamiliar, took the bench. His robe crisp, his posture rigid. He surveyed the room with a clean neutrality. "As previously noted," he began, "Judge Calloway has recused himself from this portion of the proceedings due to personal familiarity with the Grayson family. I will be issuing today's rulings." Walt felt a small ache hearing those words. He understood Calloway's choice. Ethics demanded it, but the man had been a steady compass throughout this nightmare. Still, justice didn't hinge on comfort. The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, the state is prepared to present sentencing recommendations for Daniel Reeves and Aaron Grayson." Daniel stood first at the defendant's table. He looked thinner than before, his suit hanging loosely, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Gone was the arrogance, the polished charm, the manipulator's smirk. What remained was a man cornered by his own schemes. The judge addressed him directly. "Mr. Reeves, you have been found guilty on multiple counts of financial fraud, including falsification of business records, unlawful contracting practices, and intentional property interference." He lifted a sheet of paper. "Your actions were deliberate, calculated, and harmful. The evidence presented was overwhelming." Daniel swallowed hard, but his gaze stayed glued to the floor. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I hereby sentence you to 8 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 5. A collective breath moved through the room. Michelle gasped softly, covering her mouth. Tom exhaled with a muttered, "About damn time." And Walt felt nothing but gravity, heavy, steady gravity. Daniel looked back once, only once, toward Michelle, eyes pleading. She turned away. Next, the judge turned to Aaron. Aaron tried to rise confidently, but his knees buckled. He gripped the table, knuckles white. He looked younger than ever before, like the frightened boy who used to hide behind Walt whenever thunderstorms rolled in. "Mr. Grayson," the judge said, "your case is different but no less serious." Aaron blinked rapidly, tears threatening. "You are found guilty of perjury," the judge continued, "providing false statements under oath and contributing to an attempted elder exploitation scheme. Michelle covered her eyes. Walt's heart clenched. This was his son, his first child, his pride once upon a time, the boy he'd taught to drive, taught to shave, taught to stand tall. Your willingness to manipulate the guardianship process, the judge said, and to endanger your father's autonomy for financial gain is deeply troubling. Aaron shook his head violently. No, no, please, I made mistakes. I was desperate. The judge raised a hand. Desperation does not excuse criminal conduct. Aaron sobbed. For your actions, the judge concluded, you are sentenced to 3 years in state custody, with mandatory financial restitution and psychological counseling. A strangled cry ripped from Aaron's throat. The deputies stepped forward. Walt felt the ache rise, deep and raw, but he did not look away. As the deputies took Aaron by the arms, he jerked, twisted, and screamed, "Dad, Dad, please, don't let them, Dad, help me." His voice echoed across the courtroom, bouncing off wood and concrete and memory. Walt's breath caught. He stood still, rooted in something that felt like heartbreak sharpened by truth. Ava stepped closer, her presence steadying him. "You didn't do this." She whispered, "He did." Aaron fought until the deputies pulled him through the side door. His voice faded into the hallway, cracked with desperation. When the door shut, the silence that followed felt immense. Michelle stood slowly, her entire body trembling. She approached Walt with hesitant steps, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far." Walt looked at her, not with anger, but with a sorrow so profound it softened every line in his face. He reached for her hands, holding them gently. "I don't need an apology," he said softly. "I need you to build your own life now, a life that isn't led by fear or manipulation." Michelle broke into sobs, collapsing into his arms. He held her, his grip firm but forgiving. Reporters whispered. Tom wiped his eyes discreetly. Ava lowered her gaze, giving the moment privacy. The judge dismissed the court. People stood, papers shuffled. The room began to empty. But Walt remained still, holding Michelle as the chaos slowly dissolved around them. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. And justice finally had found its place. For the first time in months, the courthouse wasn't the center of Walt Grayson's world. The chaos had passed, sentencing issued, lies exposed, justice delivered. But the aftermath lingered like dust after demolition. Lives had cracked open. Some fractures could heal, others would remain. Michelle was the first to step forward into whatever came next. She arrived at Walt's house early one morning, a suitcase in hand, her eyes swollen but calmer than before. "I'm not going home," she said quietly. "Not with everything that happened. My friend Lauren has a spare room. I'm staying with her for a while." Walt nodded, pride and sorrow tangled in his chest. "That's good," he said. "You need space, distance." Her hands trembled when she hugged him, long, tight, and trembling like she feared it might be the last time he'd accept her embrace. "I'm going to fix my life," she whispered. "I'm going to figure out who I am without all of this." Walt cupped the back of her head gently. "You will. You already started." When she drove off, Walt watched her taillights disappear down the street, praying silently that she'd find steadiness again, that the damage done wouldn't define her, that she'd rebuild with honesty instead of fear. He stayed on the porch for a long moment before finally turning toward his truck. The cabin was calling. The drive out to the rural property had always soothed him. Long stretches of empty road, autumn leaves cracking under the wheels, the world thinning into quiet. But when he pulled into the clearing, the cabin's wounded door still greeted him like a bruise he hadn't yet tended. The splintered frame sagged slightly, scarred from the break-in. He stood there, keys dangling from his hand, the hurt rising again, anger, loss, violation all wrapped together. Then another car door slammed behind him. Tom Jacobs stepped out, toolbox in tow. "Figured you'd need backup," he said, squinting at the door. "Damn shame what they did." Walt smirked softly despite himself. "I could have handled it." "I know," Tom said, grinning. "But then what excuse would I have to avoid my wife's Saturday projects?" Together they worked, pulling the frame straight, replacing hinges, sanding rough edges. They patched the scars with fresh wood, sealing over the damage but leaving just enough grain visible for memory. Inside, they restored the scattered papers, returned drawers to their places, cleaned the dust left by investigators. With each step, the cabin breathed again. And so did Walt. When they finished, Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "You rebuilt more than a door today." Walt exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said, "feels like I did." Tom nodded, eyes softening. "You're getting your life back, partner." Ava arrived 2 days later, her usual efficient stride carrying her through the cabin doorway. She handed Walt a folder, thick, neatly tabbed, the kind of organization that meant something big had been handled. "All protections are in place," she explained. "Your estate, the cabin, your pension. No one can access anything without your explicit consent. I also filed additional safeguards, just in case anyone tries something in the future." Walt flipped through the papers, absorbing the layers of legal armor she'd constructed around his life. "You didn't have to go this far." "Yes," she said firmly. "I did. After everything you endured, you deserve a wall no one can climb." He gave her a grateful nod. She paused, her expression softening. "Walt, I've worked a lot of cases. Very few people stay as steady as you did. You held on even when everything was designed to break you." Walt swallowed, emotion rising unexpectedly. "I didn't stay steady," he said quietly. "I just didn't have the luxury of breaking." Ava closed the folder gently. "Well, it's over now. Go live in peace." Detective Monroe visited next, wearing her yuzu. Al practical jacket, but her demeanor less guarded, more human. She stepped inside, glancing around the repaired cabin with a nod of approval. "Looks good in here," she said. "Better than it did a month ago." She leaned against the doorframe. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Most people panic, lash out, or shut down during cases like this. But you stayed patient. You told the truth. You let the system work." Walt gave a tired smile. "Didn't feel patient." "That's because patience isn't a feeling," Monroe said. "It's a choice." Before leaving, she added, "If you ever need anything, call me. Not professionally, just as someone who respects you." Walt nodded. It meant more than she knew. That evening, as the sun sank low beyond the trees, Walt sat on the cabin's repaired porch. The boards creaked softly beneath him, familiar, grounding. Wind carried the scent of pine and cold earth. Birds rustled in distant branches. He thought about everything. Aaron behind bars, Daniel starting his sentence, Michelle rebuilding her life. He thought about every painful decision, every lie, every moment he doubted himself. And he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. He wasn't responsible for their choices. He could love his children, mourn what they'd become, hope for their redemption, but he didn't have to carry their sins. Slowly, steadily, forgiveness began to take shape, not for them, not yet, but for himself. Walt breathed deeply as the evening settled around him. Peace didn't flood in all at once, but it arrived in small pieces, like the slow mending of an old door or the clearing of dust after a long storm. And Walt knew. The healing had finally begun. For months, Walt's world had shrunk to courtrooms, affidavits, tense phone calls, and the echo of betrayal. But slowly, almost shyly, life began expanding again. It started with a flyer at the local community center, a simple invitation to the annual fall cookout, live music, grilled food, neighbors gathering at the park. Walt almost tossed it out, but Tom caught it on the counter and slapped a hand on his shoulder. "You're going," Tom declared. You've been hiding like a hermit with back taxes. It's time you show your face again." Walt smirked. "Since when did you become my social planner?" "Since you started acting old," Tom shot back. "And we both know you're only 72 on paper." And so, reluctantly, Walt went. The park was buzzing with children playing tag, the smell of barbecue drifting through the trees. People glanced at him at first, curious, cautious. But as the afternoon unfolded, old acquaintances approached. Some shook his hand, some offered warm hugs, some simply nodded with quiet respect. A retired sergeant clapped him firmly on the back. "Heard what you went through, Walt. Takes guts to stand through that." Another neighbor handed him a plate. "Good to see you back." Walt found himself smiling, genuine, unforced, the kind of smile he hadn't felt in months. He was the man defined by scandal anymore. He was Walt Grayson again, father, widower, retired lieutenant, stubborn old man who didn't back down from the truth. Every handshake restored a little piece of him. Michelle began therapy soon after moving in with her friend Lauren. She didn't tell Walt immediately. She waited until she'd found a rhythm, 2 weeks of steady sessions, rediscovering the pieces of herself buried under Daniel's manipulation and years of emotional erosion. One evening she called. "Dad, can we meet?" Her voice was steadier, clearer. He agreed without hesitation. They met at a small cafe downtown, a quiet corner booth where the noise of espresso machines filled in their awkward pauses. Michelle stirred her tea with careful movements, eyes flicking up now and then, trying to gauge his expression. "I want to rebuild things between us," she finally said. "But slowly, honestly, not because I feel obligated, but because I want to." Walt nodded, his heart tightening. "I'd like that." She let out a shaky breath. "Therapy's helping me see how much I let Daniel influence me, how much I didn't think for myself." "You were scared," Walt said gently, "and people do strange things when they're scared." Her eyes glistened. "I'm not asking you to forget, just please don't give up on me." Walt reached across the table, taking her hand. "I never did." It was a small moment, quiet, fragile, but it stitched something back together. Over the next few weeks, their lunches became a ritual. Always simple. Sandwiches at the cafe, salads at a quiet diner, or tea at her friend's apartment. No heavy topics, no picking at wounds, just conversations about work, old family stories, updates from therapy, memories of Michelle's mother. They laughed sometimes. Other times they sat in comfortable silence. Every meeting chipped away at the wall between them. One afternoon, after she'd recounted a therapy breakthrough about self-worth, Michelle asked timidly, "Do you think I can become someone you're proud of again?" Walt answered without hesitation, "You already are." The relief that spread across her face was almost painful to watch. Still, even with healing underway, Walt couldn't shake the memory of how close he'd come to losing everything: his reputation, his autonomy, his home, even his daughter. One wrong judge, one missing piece of evidence, one misplaced word, and he could have ended his days in a facility, stripped of dignity by the very people he raised. On quiet mornings at the cabin, he sat on the repaired porch and reflected on it all: the betrayal, the fear, the fight. The storm had stormed so hard, he'd barely stood upright, but he did stand. And he survived. Tom visited often, rolling up the driveway with his usual bluster. One evening, Walt grilled steaks while Tom nursed a beer and watched the sun dip behind the tree line. "You know," Tom said, tipping his bottle toward Walt, "you fought back the right way." Walt raised an eyebrow. "Right way?" "Yeah," Tom said. "You didn't break, you didn't lash out, you didn't become what they accused you of. You let the truth do the punching." Walt chuckled. "Didn't feel like I was doing much punching." "That's because you're humble," Tom replied. "You stood your ground, you kept your dignity, and you trusted the right people. That takes guts." Walt's chest warmed, not with pride exactly, but with a quiet acceptance. Tom wasn't flattering him. He was recognizing the fight, the endurance, the pain Walt had swallowed in silence. Tom set his empty bottle down. "You're a different man now, Walt, stronger. Just don't forget you've still got living to do." Walt didn't respond immediately. He watched the last sliver of sunlight vanish behind the woods, the sky melting into orange and purple. The world felt wide again, open, safe. And for the first time in a long while, the heaviness inside him lightened, not all at once, but enough to breathe deeper than before. Hope, once buried under fear and betrayal, stirred quietly back into his life. Not loud, not dramatic, just present, like a soft light returning after a long, bitter night. Ava Larkin arrived at Walt's house just after noon, carrying a slim black folder tucked beneath her arm. She looked different today, lighter, almost relieved. When she stepped inside, she offered Walt a small, genuine smile. "This," she said, placing the folder gently on his kitchen table, "is the end of it." Walt pulled out a chair, the wooden legs scraping quietly across the floor. He opened the folder. Inside were neatly typed pages, legal filings, certifications, and official stamps. Ava tapped the first document. "This clears your name entirely. All accusations formally dismissed. Court findings sealed to protect your reputation. There will be no lingering marks on your record, no pending reviews. It's done." Walt traced the embossed seal with his thumb. For months, he'd woken every morning with a weight on his chest, the fear that one more attack might come, one more accusation, one more surprise petition waiting on the porch. But now, as he stared at the signed documents, the weight began to loosen. Ava leaned back slightly. "You handled this with more integrity than most people I've ever represented. You didn't retaliate, didn't spiral, didn't lose yourself. You endured." Walt nodded, his voice quiet. "Thank you, Ava, for everything." "Just promise me one thing," she said. "No more doubting yourself. You did nothing wrong." He gave a faint smile. "I'll try." A week later, Walt sat in his attorney's office, this time with a different kind of paperwork. His will. He had updated it before, after his wife passed, but now the words on the page felt heavier, more deliberate. "Michelle receives everything. Aaron is removed entirely." He didn't add explanations, didn't leave messages or warnings, just clarity. The truth was already etched deeply enough into his life. He didn't need to carve it into paper. When he signed the final page, a sense of acceptance washed over him, not vindictive, not angry, just resolute. Michelle would have a chance to rebuild. Aaron would face the consequences of his choices. And Walt would leave behind what mattered without fear someone would twist it. Detective Monroe visited later that afternoon. She stood on his porch with her usual calm confidence, but this time there was something else in her eyes, satisfaction. "Just wanted you to hear it from me," she said. "My investigation is officially closed, every loose end tied off." Walt stepped outside with her, letting the breeze brush over them. "You did good work, detective." "So did you," she replied. "Most people break when family turns on them like that. You didn't." "I thought I might," Walt admitted, "more than once." "No," Monroe said firmly. "You just bent. Bending isn't breaking." She tipped her head respectfully. "Stay out of trouble, Mr. Grayson." Walt chuckled. "I'll do my best." Later that evening, Walt returned to the cabin. Tea. His time, he didn't walk onto the property with tension in his spine or dread in his chest. Instead, he walked slowly, deliberately, breathing in the smell of pine and damp earth. The repaired door stood strong, smooth under his hand as he pushed it open. Inside, sunlight filtered through the windows, catching dust motes drifting in the air. The cabin felt whole again, quiet, steady, protective. Walt knelt beside the fireplace and opened a small box he'd brought with him. Inside were the last remnants of the lies filed against him, copies of the fraudulent affidavits, printouts of manipulated statements, pages Aaron and Daniel had used to paint him as unstable. He placed them one by one onto the fire grate. The first page curled quickly under the flame, its edges crisping, blackening. Another page followed, and another. Soon the documents were turning to ash, falling apart in delicate fragments. Walt watched the fire, the glow flickering against his face. It wasn't anger he felt. It wasn't triumph either. It was closure. Symbolic, quiet, full. The flames died down slowly. Walt used the poker to spread the remains, scattering the ashes into nothing recognizable. He stood up, dusting his hands, a long breath easing from his chest. This cabin, this life was his again, untouched, unthreatened, unshadowed. He stepped outside onto the porch, the sky turning orange as the sun dipped behind the trees. The silence wrapped around him, not empty but peaceful. For the first time since this ordeal began, he stood tall, not out of defense, but out of freedom. Walt Grayson was whole again. Snow fell in slow, drifting flakes on Christmas morning, settling across the trees around Walt's house like a soft white blanket. For years, the holiday had felt hollow, just another day he tried to survive rather than celebrate. But today was different. Michelle's car pulled into the driveway just after 10. Walt stepped onto the porch as she got out, bundled in a red scarf, cheeks flushed from the cold. She paused for a moment, looking up at him with a tentative smile, the kind that asked permission to exist. Walt smiled back, and this time it came effortlessly. Inside, the house smelled faintly of pine from the small tree Walt had decorated the night before. Michelle set a bag of groceries on the counter, brushing snow from her shoulders. "I brought everything," she said, opening the bag. "Your favorite stuffing and Mom's recipe card." Walt's breath caught. The card, yellowed around the edges, written in his late wife's looping handwriting, felt like a piece of her still reaching into their lives. Michelle set it gently on the counter, running a thumb across the ink. "I thought maybe we could cook like she used to," she whispered. He nodded, voice thick. "I'd like that." They moved quietly at first, unsure, careful. Walt chopped vegetables while Michelle mixed spices. She laughed softly when she spilled a little thyme, brushing it aside with her wrist. "That smell," she murmured. "I haven't smelled it since." Walt finished her sentence with a gentle smile. "Since she was here." Michelle's eyes softened. "Yeah." For the first time in years, the kitchen didn't feel empty. As the roast cooked, Michelle stirred a pot of gravy, humming under her breath. Walt leaned against the doorway, watching her with a warmth he hadn't allowed himself in a long time. This wasn't the haunted, guilt-ridden daughter who had arrived months ago. This was Michelle, the girl who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen while her mother scolded her playfully. The girl who once sat on Walt's shoulders at the town parade. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. "What?" "You're smiling," he said. She touched her cheek self-consciously, then laughed lightly. "Guess I am." But it wasn't forced, not strained. It wasn't the brittle smile she'd worn through therapy appointments or quiet apologies. It was genuine, whole, the smile of someone who had begun stitching herself back together. They carried the food to the table, matching plates, mismatched silverware, a table runner Michelle found in a drawer and insisted on using even though it was frayed. Halfway through the meal, she set her fork down. "Dad, can I say something?" Walt nodded. "I'm not trying to erase what happened," she said carefully. "I know I hurt you, and I know I can't undo it, but I want to move forward with honesty, with boundaries. I need you to tell me if I ever step wrong again, and I'll do the same." Walt took a slow breath. That's how families work, or how they're supposed to. She swallowed. "Do you forgive me?" He reached across the table and took her hand. "Michelle, I forgave you the moment you told me the truth." Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't heavy. They were clearing something inside her. "Thank you, Dad." "No bitterness," he continued softly. "No anger, we start clean." She squeezed his hand, her voice a soft whisper. clean. After dinner, they sat by the small tree, a blank. It draped over their legs, mugs of cocoa warming their hands. The fire crackled softly. Snow drifted outside. They talked, not about the past, not about the trial, not about the darkness they'd survived, but about life. Her job, his plans for the cabin, recipes they wanted to try next year, a movie they both remembered from her childhood. No tension, no fear, just the quiet ease of two people relearning each other. At one point, Michelle leaned her head against his shoulder. "I missed this," she murmured. "I missed us." Walt rested his cheek atop her hair. "Me too." For the first time in decades, long before his wife passed, long before the fractures began, Walt felt a calmness settle over him. A peace so steady it felt like exhaling after years of holding his breath. The heaviness was gone. Not shifted, not quieted, lifted. As the fire burned low and the snow thickened outside, Walt closed his eyes briefly, letting the warmth wash over him. This Christmas wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect. But it was honest. It was healing. And it was the calmest holiday he'd had in decades. The courthouse parking lot was nearly empty when Walt arrived, just after sunrise. Soft winter light stretched across the pavement, catching on frost that glimmered like tiny shards of glass. He stood for a moment beside his truck, breathing in the cold air, feeling the quiet settle around him. Today wasn't about hearings or arguments. Today was about closure. Inside, the building was silent in a way he had never known it to be. No echo of rushing attorneys, no shuffle of paperwork, no murmurs from anxious families. Just the faint hum of old heating vents and the soft tap of Walt's shoes on polished floors. He made his way down the long hallway to courtroom 4B, the room where his life had nearly been taken from him, and where it had been given back. The door creaked slightly when he pushed it open. The room felt bigger without the crowd. The gallery benches were empty, the judge's bench dark, the witness stand resting quietly in the corner like an empty stage after the final curtain. Walt walked slowly to the middle of the gallery and sat down, hands resting loosely in his lap. For a long time, he simply stared ahead. He could almost see it all again. The tense faces, the lies stacked on paper, the weight of his children's accusations pressing against him. He could hear Aaron's voice rising in panic, Michelle's trembling confession, Daniel slipping under the pressure. And then Judge Calloway's voice, steady, cutting through everything like a blade. "Fraud has been detected. Mr. Grayson is fully competent. The truth is clear." Walt let out a slow breath. Everything he had survived passed through him like a distant echo, still painful, but no longer sharp enough to break skin. "You picked a quiet day to visit." Walt turned. Judge Henry Calloway stood in the aisle, hands in the pockets of his long coat. His face looked more lined than before, but his eyes carried the same measured steadiness that had saved Walt's life. Walt rose respectfully. "Didn't expect to see you here." Calloway stepped forward, offering a small, tired smile. "I still walk through sometimes. Keeps me grounded, reminds me what this place is supposed to be." Walt nodded. "It saved me." There was no tremor in his voice now, no hesitation, just truth. Calloway came closer, his expression softening. "You saved yourself, Walt. I just paid attention." Walt shook his head. "Most people wouldn't have. You recognized Daniel. You remembered Aaron's sealed file. You saw what they were building around me. If you hadn't paused the case when you did." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Calloway exhaled slowly. Sometimes the law requires distance, but justice requires memory. He looked around the empty courtroom. This room has seen its share of pain, but every now and then it gets something right. Walt felt emotion stir in his chest, a mixture of gratitude and understanding. "Thank you," he said softly, "for seeing the truth when everything else felt stacked against me." Calloway offered a quiet nod of respect. "You deserved the truth, and you bore the fight with more dignity than most." He paused. "Take care of yourself, Walt. Live the life they tried to take from you." "I will," Walt replied. The judge gave one last nod before turning and walking out, the door closing gently behind him. Walt stood alone for another moment, letting the stillness sink in. Then he turned and walked out as well. The hallway felt brighter than before, lighter. When he stepped outside, the sun had risen fully, melting the frost on the pavement. Michelle leaned against his truck, bundled in a coat, her hands tucked into her pockets. She straightened when she saw him, her smile gentle and warm. "How was it?" she asked. Walt took a slow breath, feeling the last pieces of the past settle behind him. "Needed," he said, "and overdue." She nodded, looping her arm through his. "Rhea. Die to go." He looked at her, the restored softness in her eyes, the steadiness she was rebuilding piece by piece, and felt something inside him settle into place. "Yeah," he said, voice steady, "I'm ready." They walked together across the lot, sunlight warming their backs, the courthouse shrinking behind them with every step. Walt paused just before opening the truck door, glancing once more at the building that had nearly taken everything, and ultimately given him back his life. "My children tried to sentence me for life," he said quietly, the wind catching the last of his breath, "but the truth set me free.